Hello and welcome to, well, it's Life Astrologer on YouTube. And I'm Anna Isabel. I'm a psychological astrologer as well as an analytical hypnotherapist. And I am so excited today because I have with me Professor of Literature, Allan Hunt, who is also a counselor and author. I've had great fun reading his book, Path to Synchronicity, and interviewed him about that in the past for Lightways. So today I am having a look at his chart. And so, Allan, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, I always like to start with the sun, because the sun represents the person. And in astrology, the sun is more what we grow into. The moon represents more of our past and our instinct, if you like, the way that we were nurtured. But I like to start with the sun because it's, as I say, it's what we're evolving into. And Taurus is a sign which, I guess the first thing would be, is very sensual because it's an earth sign. So there's a need for comfort, a desire to seek comfort, but there's also a certain determination, perseverance. It's the strength. I mean, you can just imagine trying to push a bull across a field. That would, well, I think it'd be interesting to see, but I don't think you can. So it's that strength of the bull that's there, as well as being an earth sign. So it's the solidity of the earth. So there's a very practical side to Taurus. And so what do you think? Do you see yourself as being having any of those traits?
Oh yes, oh yes. I've often been told and said myself, oh yeah, there's a Taurus in there that's showing its features right now. So yes, this is me. Yeah.
I think the thing is, though, that Taurus is never stubborn for the sake of being stubborn.
Oh, of course not.
There's usually a reason behind it. And I think if you give a Taurus an idea, you need to back it up with something practical, particularly if that idea is imposing change. So if you're going to impose change, you'd better have a really good reason, because I'm sitting here in my little comfort zone and I'm not moving. The pasture is really nice right here. So I'm not moving unless you give me a really good reason to. And then I might actually gallop in your direction. What do you think? Is that fair?
I think that is very accurate, yes. So we see this the same way.
Yes. So I think the difference, though, for you, which is a big difference, is that where you have the sun placed is in the 9th house of the chart. And the 9th house it's about big ideas. It's about the intellect. It's about understanding that there needs to be meaning to life.
Yes.
And,
yes.
You know, you're a counselor and I'm a therapist, and you and I both know that a lot of the people we're seeing because they're going through an existential crisis.
Yes.
They've lost meaning.
Right.
And you, with the sun in the 9th, everything is about the quest for meaning. And I think
yes,
so many people with sun in the 9th have an interest in literature, in mythology. And why would that be? There's nothing very practical about it. You know, if you're a Taurus, where's this but it's the meaning that comes from those and how you apply it to life that makes sense. So tell us a little bit more. You see that?
Yes, I do see it exactly in those terms. In fact, one of my other books, because one of the things I do is I teach memoir, and the subtitle, it's called Write Your Memoir, wonderful title, of course, and then the subtitle is The Soul Work of Telling Your Life Story. Because
Mm.
what I believe people do, and I've observed often enough, wow, often enough is an understatement, is that when people begin to look at things, they discover the meaning or the meanings that they know is there, are there, but they haven't looked for until now. And so for me and for the people I work with, as you so rightly said, most of the people who turn up looking for guidance have lost a sense of meaning and lost a sense of real purpose. And rather than just say, oh, you're burned out, that doesn't help anything. What we have to do is say, okay, so meaning seems to have drifted away from you. Let's work in ways that can begin to discover the new meanings that are behind the old meanings, the old values, the tired ways of doing things. So yes, this I'm saying yes in a very long-winded fashion, but this is exactly what I do and what you do.
So how did you get here? Because if we talk about the sun as evolving, and you're professor of literature, you work in academia,
Yeah.
which is one of the natural pastures, shall we say, for a sun in the ninth.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get there? Was it something that was always within you, or is this view or belief something that's evolved over time?
Well, it's both, actually. I mean, I can look back and I can almost tell you the year when I decided that literature was often a guide to how to live, and I needed a guide to how to live because I was a teenager. So literature began to absorb my energy, and I was seeing the world, reading the books, trying to make sense of it. Followed literature through all my degrees. So that was 10 years of study to doctoral level, always looking for the meaning, the value behind the story, not just for the story, how it fits together, but what actually is the value that we can or could take away. After that, I went to work for a while. After I worked in a college, I went to work with disturbed adolescents. And they were people who really had either created weird meanings for their lives or had lost meanings. I then came back into academia saying, I think this is where my strengths can be best used. Disturbed adolescents, especially the ones I was working with, were not that receptive sometimes to the sorts of thoughts that I was hoping to engage them with. And of course, they were adolescents. And I've stayed on that path ever since. So literature for me has always been about what's going on in the world, what can we learn, what's the meaning, and the biggest question of all, what am I here to do? What am I here to do? What are we all here to do? It's going to be different for each one of us. I found that to be immensely engaging for all of my students. At least I shouldn't say all of them. Some were disengaged, I'm sure, but I found it a very engaging thing to do for, well, 30 odd years. And at the same time, I developed my counseling practice for the reasons that we've just spoken about. And I discovered there that if one just talks about stuff, meanings slide through your fingers. If you talk and write about stuff or draw and paint about stuff, then we go just a level deeper, perhaps even than we were expecting. So yes, it's evolved in that way.
Well, it's interesting because as we're speaking, you may have noticed I'm glancing at your chart, and there's a number of things that I can see. The first being that you have the moon in the sign of Scorpio, which is opposite the sun. So you were born at a full moon. So that to me says that there's a head versus heart journey at some point where
Okay.
you need to think about that. But I think also the moon in Scorpio, there's so much emotion early in life, except for the fact that Saturn was so close to it that it's like it was put into a straitjacket. So I know, particularly as well, you have a Virgo ascendant. I don't know that you grew up in an environment that was very conducive to self-expression, particularly of the emotional kind.
Got that.
So I think, if we're talking about the journey of self-discovery, integration of the emotional self had to play a part in this.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think we're allowed to. So tell us a little bit about that side of things.
Yes. Well, thank you for putting it so tactfully. I mean, there's the conflict between head and heart, as you say. Academia is really all about head. As the more time I spent in academia, the more I realized that it was the heart that needed feeding. And so my approach shifted more and more to trying to get people, encouraging people to engage their emotions in their reactions to literature and to the various writing exercises that I would give them in a funny little course I had, which became very popular, called The Therapeutic Uses of Writing. And that suited me and it suited them, absolutely, because nobody had asked my students what they were thinking and feeling. Mostly what they were feeling was taboo. And of course, when one is a student, one has a million feelings and nobody wants to know about them, or nobody knows how to handle them. So the heart space, I think, was the space that I developed there. And some people would say I stopped being a serious academic at that point, which, let them say that if they wish. I still produce the serious academic articles, which, wonderful, a bit dry. And I put the rest of my energy and effort into the heart space of getting people to release those emotions that had been crushed. Working with memoir, of course, produces a lot of that. And it's very cleansing, very renewing. And I've continued that path ever since. I'm still, great friends with all my other academic chums, and they say, I see you're going off towards the heart space a little bit. And I say, that's right.
It's funny, isn't it? Because, we were talking about Taurian determination. Well, Scorpio is a fixed sign also. And you just can't shift that. And the strength that comes from having two fixed signs within you is that you can say, you know what, I've decided I'm going to do this. And I'm going to do this. And by the way, I'm going to do this. That's sometimes, as long as it's not the wrong direction, we can be, we have to be that we're not just dismissing what we're being told because we have a set direction that we've chosen. But I think on the whole, this is an intuition issue. But I think what I find interesting also is that you grow up in an environment where you're not allowed much self-expression.
Precisely.
And then you choose to work in an environment that mirrors that. So do you feel you had to make that choice consciously twice in a way?
Yes. Very astute. Absolutely. I was brought up in a very strict, not terribly imaginative environment, and the schooling was the same. And I had to make a choice as to how I was going to best survive in that space. And that was the head space, the intellect space. And then later I had to make a decision again, probably around the time I became very ill. I had to make a decision that the heart needed to be paid attention to as well. The complete opposite direction, and yet could be fed by the intellect as well. They could feed each other. So yes, you're absolutely accurate.
It's just interesting.
Mhm.
I'm your chart and I'm listening to you, and I've got so many thoughts going through my head. Um, the head really is emphasized in your chart,
Yeah, I believe
because
it.
of there's a very strong emphasis on the intellect. And it's interesting because you talked about your upbringing, but your schooling as well. And that Moon Saturn conjunction, which I mentioned, is sitting in the third house, which is the house of education, primary school, secondary school. Whereas the ninth house is the wider world of university and academia. So, and having Saturn there, it's almost, I can almost just imagine, learning by rote kind of thing. And I can imagine, the emphasis on the perfect handwriting and
Yes.
everything just so. And I can imagine you being bored to tears by that,
Yes.
is because you've got
Very
Mercury
accurate.
Gemini. Mercury Gemini is so lively, and you've got Mars in Gemini as well. Both of them are so infinitely curious, and you would have been the kind of child who had a million questions you wanted to ask, except I'm sure you weren't allowed to ask any.
Well, I wasn't. You're right.
Yeah, I just see that. Um, Having said that, just to two further thoughts along this line. That Mercury Mars in Gemini that I talked about are in the 10th house, which is to do with career. And Mercury is in its own sign of Gemini. And as I've already said, it's about curiosity, wanting to learn, but it's also about communication. About
Yes,
communication,
Mercury.
whether it's oral or written, and also the ruler of your chart because of your Virgo ascendant. So Mercury plays a huge part here. Everywhere I look, he's emphasized. And so it is all about learning and communicating. And what is communicating? It's sharing what you've learned. And you are a teacher, you're a professor. And as a counselor, you're also a teacher of sorts. Because you can't, well, I suppose you can, but I don't know you'd be very effective if, part of a counselor's work is to show people different options or different perspectives, so that they can choose the one that they want to adopt. But that's a kind of teaching, because what you're doing is you're introducing people to different ideas or different perspectives. So that's also teaching. So it's an incredibly mercurial chart.
Yes, it is. Yeah, mercurial in every sense.
Yes, exactly. You of course you understand that word and what I mean, and quite literally, that comes from your chart as I'm looking at it. With that Sun in the ninth house, quite aside from, as I said, being about academia and the quest for meaning, it's about, how can I put it? It's also about the dissemination of information. So it's higher education, and it's linked with publishing.
Yes.
And also travel, because you know what, travel broadens the mind. So it's
So
anything mind. It's so meaning brings us into realms of spirituality, perhaps for some people religion, but it's to do with travel. So have you? I imagine you've done a fair amount of travel.
Yes, I have, especially when younger. I've lived outside of the United States and outside England. I lived in Belgium. My mother was Swiss. Lived in Italy. Visited Peru, India, Madagascar, North Africa. There's a fair amount of travel involved there. And of course, then I came to the United States, and so been hopping to and fro there. So again, very accurate. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting too, because I have yet to meet somebody with a sun in the ninth who hasn't ended up living somewhere other than where they were born.
Oh, fascinating.
It's that sometimes it's a conscious quest to experience different cultures. Others, it's a set of circumstances that leads them in that direction. But anyone who has emigrated knows they are never the same after that experience, even if they return to the place where they were born and brought up. It's
not the same.
You can never be the same because you've absorbed something of the places that you've lived in.
Yes.
And you're now an amalgam, and you're no longer what you were. So that's important, because that's part of the growth of the through experience of the sun in the ninth house person.
Okay.
And the reason I'm dwelling on that is because the North Node in your chart is in Sagittarius. So the North Node is important because it's one of the most important karmic significators in a chart. So we could talk about that as being fate. We could talk about it as it's fate only from the point of view that it's a clue as to your life's plan for the benefit of your soul development. So we can put it like that. We can say that this is where we find clues to our life's purpose. But here it is in Sagittarius, which is a sign that corresponds with the ninth house. So all the things that we were talking about. And I think there's a word that I think is really important for Sagittarius, and that's conviction. So now we can unite two concepts: the concept of meaning and the concept of conviction. So I would propose that your journey has been one in which you have been asked, what do you believe in? And how much do you believe it? Do you really believe that? Prove it.
Yeah.
You ready to stand by this? And so how do you feel about that? How do you see it?
That seems absolutely accurate to me. Yes. I have on many occasions been asked about my beliefs and then been required to defend them in the face of sometimes quite stern opposition. I got used to it now, but at first it's a little disquieting. Like, well, where's all this opposition coming from? But yes, you are absolutely accurate. Yeah, and again and again, it seems as though I have been asked, as it were, to put my money where my mouth is, and I can no problem with that. And then there would be, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" from all sides. So yes, you are absolutely on target here.
I think I'm wondering.
Yeah.
to what extent this has its roots in your childhood. This North Node is in the 4th house, which is linked with father.
Yeah.
And the Sun, which also is a significator for father, is sitting in the 9th house. So I wonder, I'm seeing your parents as being very, very different.
Yes.
I am, and so I'm wondering whether you've inherited this from your father, or whether it's something that your father did which made you head in this direction. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, my father was a man of very definite opinions, which he stuck to. He was in the Royal Air Force, and he was made a prisoner of war, actually, in World War II, which required him to stick to who he was with some determination. So, yes, I mean, I think I took in many aspects of his, perhaps we would call it rigidity, but definitely determination. And then my mother was Swiss, and the Swiss are very precise, and she was no exception. And she was determined enough to marry my father and leave Switzerland and leave her family. A good, loving Swiss family. They were all kind of surprised. So in some ways, I get both aspects of that same determination that you're talking about. So yes, I think that's very, very true. Although they were very different.
I see them as being, almost opposites.
Yes.
That's how I see them. Just thinking about, because this North Node is in the 4th house, and the 4th house is, as I said, it's to do with father, it's to do with root. Described how both of them had to have a deep sense of conviction in their own right, to do things that they did. Oh, sorry, I've just spotted something else as well. It's just when I'm looking at the chart, of course, sometimes I get distracted. My eye falls on something.
Yeah.
But coming back to my original thought, my original thought was that there may be a reason for that, shall we call it rectitude, in the way that you were raised.
Yeah.
And unpleasant as I imagine it may have been many times, and I say unpleasant, I suspect painful is probably the better word.
Yes.
And I think that I think that there would have been power struggles going on.
Yes.
Between you and your parents, and actually between your parents.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
I think there was a discipline that you learned,
that's true,
which enabled you to get through academia and do well and thrive, because that requires a certain rigor of thought and precise communication. So I think what I'm getting at is that I think that your childhood trained you for that world.
Definitely.
Unwittingly, but I gave you what you needed in terms of that grit that's required to do that. And then, of course, later on, for you to be able to stand up for yourself, because I suspect you'd had to do that all along.
Yes.
In various ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so you were well practiced at it already. So it's rather beautiful sometimes, isn't it, when you look back and you think very things that were the bane of your life. And we also have been very destructive, you know, because I'm sure that you could see how let's say overpowering a child through certain parenting practices can stifle a child to the point where it deprives them of the oxygen they need to grow as human beings.
Yes.
And I'm absolutely certain that you got very close to losing that oxygen at various points.
Absolutely.
But nevertheless, the moon in Scorpio is associated with death, people say, but call it resurrection, because you can't be reborn unless you died. Not possible. And I think that when you found yourself and you found your voice, that's where you found your heart. And this is the heart mind thing.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yes, I think that is true. Finding one's voice, finding one's heart is what is at the core of writing. You can't write without a voice. You can't teach without a voice. And it took me a while to do that for exactly the reasons that you spelled out. It was almost crushed out of me. When I became ill, I couldn't breathe. I had lung problems. So
I was thinking how literally when you became ill, you couldn't breathe.
I couldn't breathe and I couldn't function and I couldn't anything, of course. And I came very close to ceasing to be. But that perhaps propelled me, and I should be, I mean, the word gratitude has started us off, but I'm very grateful, I think, for most, if not all of these challenges, because when one looks behind them, one sees there is an open door that one needs to go through. And so for me, it was, oh, this isn't working. Why keep trying to make it work? Try something else. And my determination can be useful, and it can also be stubbornness.
Well, in that instance, I think it was, and I think our viewers should know that we're referring to this marvelous little book called Rectitude and Beyond, in which Allan describes how he came very close to death, and the reasons why that came to be, and how he got out of it. And I, quite aside from recommending this book with all my heart, because it is a beautifully written explanation of some very important spiritual principles. And we'll talk more about this in the podcast, In the Light, which I will put a link to on the notes for this interview. And then you can find out much more about gratitude and the principles behind it. But I would say that there is something here that also tells me that your heart was going to win. That is that you have Neptune sitting in your third house, and Neptune is the planet we associate with boundlessness, no bound, about connecting with the transcendent in a way where you become one. So it is the planet of spirituality. And in the third house, which is this, a house to do with intellect, you know, how the mind works, there's no way that you are going to be able to stay content. You know, there would have been a flood at some point, especially given Scorpio is a water sign too. So I wonder, did it begin with religion? Did this rectitude that we've been talking about, was it to do with religion on your parents' side? Did you go to a religious school? Or
no, it wasn't. It was, yes, I think it was humanism, actually, which came through literature. So, I mean, as a young person, I was not at all religious or even cared about divinity or any of the divine aspects of the earth. But growing older, one sees more and more of the divine around one in all its many and various forms, and it's impossible to pretend it isn't there. So yes. So
we're back to growing into that yourself.
Very much so.
I think there's just this desire to transcend. And maybe when you were younger, as a child, did you lose yourself in books and stories?
Oh yes.
So that's the Neptune in the third, because that was your escape, because Neptune is about wanting to transcend. That's its higher frequency, shall we say. But on the lower, more practical level, it's also the desire to escape. And I think in the third house, it would be through the imagination. And of course, there is your love of literature born right there, because you're already, as a child, not just escaping, but you are being exposed to some extraordinary ideas and thoughts, and at some point that begins to knit together.
Yes, absolutely right. Yes, that's what happened.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for.
I should be thanking you. This is very, very high level, accurate, and insightful analysis of my chart. You've got it right there. That's correct.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm just so pleased that we had a chance to do this. It's nice for people to be able to get to understand a little bit more about astrology.
Yes.
Seeing it in action, but equally also it's a lovely way for people to get to know more about you.
Exactly. Yes.
It's nice, a nice way of marrying the two. So I want to thank you, and I would like to encourage viewers to listen to the podcast on Rectitude.
That was impressive.
With notes on here. And I will also recommend very highly the book Gratitude and Beyond, and I'll put a link to that as well. So thank you very much, Allan, for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I can't thank you enough. This has been marvelous, and it's not as though we had compared notes beforehand or anything like that. I mean, you looked at the chart and you see the major things and most of the important things I can think of that are going on for me and have been going on for many years. So as a way of understanding another person, wow, you.
This is why I love astrology, and this is I am doing this with you and for people, because it's the most beautiful way I have found to look at the heart of an individual. So thank you once again for joining us today.
Oh, I'm full of gratitude.
And for viewers, there's going to be more to come. But in the meantime, check out the notes, click on those links, and make sure you subscribe.